Hello and welcome to NextOppSocial. We are your hosts, Richelle Wright, Joanne Buford, and Nina Payne. We believe entrepreneurship is empowerment, and we are committed to the development and progress of entrepreneurs, providing you with the information you need to build thriving businesses. Today we are very pleased to welcome Nicole Beecher, the founder and owner of Beecher Etiquette School of Michigan, a premier source for personal and professional etiquette and the overall enhancement of life skills. So welcome, Nicole. We're very excited to have you here at Next Up Social. So let's dive in. We'll have you tell us about yourself, your background, and how you got started with entrepreneurship.
Okay. So, a little bit about me. I am a Detroit native. So I attended schools in Detroit, and I was introduced to entrepreneurship from my family. I am actually a descendant of the Tulsa massacre, and I was actually in Tulsa in May. So I'm actually a descendant. So I really come from a line of entrepreneurs, whether it be hair salons, brokers, real estate brokers, uh, accounting firms, that type of thing. So I really come from a line of entrepreneurship. But for me, it started initially, and this may make you laugh, but it initially started when I was about 13. And I started off with selling candy, candy bars to be exact, right?
I love it.
And initially it was like, oh, we'll have a fundraiser and this is what we'll do. But then eventually I was like, no, this is actually, it ended up becoming a business, right? And then by the time I turned 16, I had actually started a bookkeeping service. And so I provided bookkeeping services for business owners in the Sherwood Forest and Sherwood Place area, which is the Bagley district and the Sherwood Forest district, the area that I grew up in. And then by the time I was 18, I formally formed Beecher Consulting, and then I had a small, I called it a beauty supply business, but it's kind of like, I sold some different type of supplies and different things. So my journey of entrepreneurship started very, very young. Watching individuals throughout my family, hold jobs and also, run businesses. And then individuals that, my mom knew, they have businesses all up and down the Avenue of Fashion, which we still call it today. And so it was really cool, and then I had cousins who had beauty salons and then, car washes. So for me, it was really just seeing along with working in corporate, it really was seeing the fact that this is really a part of, who your family is. And so over the years I've had several different types of businesses. So business consulting eventually morphed into what's called the Beecher Group. So I had that over the years, and in 2014 I actually formed the Beecher Group because what I resolved was, we provided with my consulting services, we provided so many different types of services that we really were a group. And when I say that, I mean, I contracted, CPAs, attorneys who could provide services, which meant it was a referral type of course, type of service from, I mean, just various different. We provided different types of service, various types of services. So it really just made sense. So when you came to the Beecher Group, you could get from anywhere from marketing and branding to leaving out, having have met with the CPA that was on my staff, right? And then during that time, we provided referral loan service. So if you needed a mortgage or anything like that, you could come to my company, and if I could not do it, or if I wasn't licensed or trained to do it, trust me, I had a line of individuals that contracted with me, and you were able to get basically anything you needed. And so in 2014, the Beecher Group formed. And what's interesting about that is at the time, I was a regional manager for Comcast, right? So it was an interesting time. And I actually had taken a position with Comcast about a year and a half prior in leadership. And by the time September rolled around, I was like, you know what? I'm ready. I'm ready to go back, to be 100% entrepreneur, right? And so the Beecher Group was formed, really rebranded at that time. After rebranding, I completed or participated or sponsored or launched the careers of some individuals in some in music, some in the beauty industry. I had completed technical writing services for major companies in which they contracted, because I'm also a technical writer, and they contracted, my services for operational excellence or leading projects and initiatives to launch, right, or making sure that those projects launched on time. And that was really cool. I also sponsored major concerts and major artists, or sponsored up and coming artists, and then had some other things. And so when it comes to Beecher Etiquette School of Michigan, interestingly, Beecher Etiquette School of Michigan was actually a vision of mine when I was about 16, right? I was sitting in Arabic class, and I was just like, there are just some things that I've been privy to or have had access to that maybe not everyone has had access to. And what I realized was that that was an opportunity for me to make a mark at some point in society, right? With providing a level of training and resources that everyone doesn't always have access to, either because the parents don't have the background. Sometimes they don't have the funding. Sometimes, just in general, it needs to be something that may be separate from your normal school day, that's a part of enrichment. And so while it took me until officially 2018, December 2018, when we were officially established, over the years, I still taught privately. So I taught etiquette. I taught, provided professional training. I provided leadership training. I received certifications while at Comcast and other organizations in coaching, sales coaching, pro coach, Six Sigma, ISO training. And so all of those things, when I really looked at the diversity of the training and experience that I had, I was just like, wow, this is really kind of cool. And not that I was patting my own self on the back, but when I really began to count the individuals and the thousands of people lives who I changed throughout the years around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world, it was just like, I think it's time. But there was a pivotal point in my life that really, I won't say forced me to move forward with opening the school, but in 2018, my grandmother, who's deceased, she was in her 90s, but she became ill and she passed away. But my goal was to open the school before she passed, right? And I kept telling her, I said, okay, Granny, just hold tight, because my school is dedicated to my mother and my grandmother. And I said, just wait a minute. And she's looking at me like, I'm 90 something years old, right? She's like, I've lived life. And I said, I just need you to hold tight. I was like, I'm almost finished. I've been traveling on business. But she passed in June of 2018. And my mother and my grandmother, their training and the whole etiquette and the social graces and that type thing was so pivotal in my life. It was really at that point. It was like, okay, I need to do this, and I need to do this year. And I did not realize, until that happened, just how much it would impact me, if that makes sense. And sometimes you're sitting on something and you're just kind of like, okay, well, the need is there. I know the need is there. The need is there now, even more so than it was back then, right? For etiquette and social graces and professional development. And so it was just like, you know what, this is the year. So in December 2018, I actually fully formally established Beecher Etiquette School of Michigan, which is quote unquote Beecher Etiquette School, but Beecher Etiquette School of Michigan. And we had our official ribbon cutting in February 2019. So that's a long way around the globe, but that really is a part of my story. But one of the things I also want to talk about is the fact that being a hiring manager over the years really gave me even more insight into why we need the training so badly. Sometimes individuals will say, well, I have everything I need. Well, I've gone to school, I'm trained, not understanding that there's so many types of etiquette, right? So when we think of etiquette, most often we're thinking about dining, but that's just very small facet of what etiquette is. And the other part of that is etiquette and social graces are life skills. So those things you can use throughout your life to enhance your life, springboard into a new career, uh, enhance a current career, learn about different cultures. You know, for example, there is a segment I either teach it as a part of finishing school or term school, but we talk about cultural communication etiquette as well as cultural etiquette, right? And then we talk about, there's a segment that I talk about or I teach, and it's called Power Words, and really using those power words to reshape who you are and how you think about yourself and how you feel about yourself, and how the words that you speak over yourself it can shape who you are and how you progress through life. And so I'm grateful that I've had the experience that I've had, throughout I would say all over the world, really, because it's giving me an even greater insight. Aside from the fact of being able to communicate in about 7 different languages. So that is really.
Wait, hold on. Let's just hold the phone right there.
In there.
You know, you dropped a whole lot of nuggets in that whole, I'm going to call it a dissertation, intro. But the fact that you speak 7 languages?
Yeah.
I can communicate. So I can either speak the language or dialect, or I can write in the particular language. Yeah.
Wow.
Which languages are they? I heard you say you took Arabic. You jumped over that one. You was like, well, I was in my Arabic class. I blah, 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 blah. And I wrote it down like,
yeah.
are
So
you studying Arabic?
some of them include, so when I was in kindergarten is when I first started learning French and Spanish. Arabic, I started learning it before, like right at the tip of going into high school, but I really dove into it until high school. At one point, Arabic was my second language. Now I understand with listening more than I respond. But if someone's speaking Arabic, I can respond to them and I understand what they're saying.
That's amazing.
I do communicate. There are some African dialects that I actually can communicate in. And so I learned those from, of course, when you have a spouse or a significant other who speaks other languages, it's very helpful because we spoke the language through, in the home. So those are just some of the languages.
Nice.
Okay. Do you mind giving us a little Arabic?
You maybe at the end of the call, I will.
Okay. I do have a question about something that you started with. I think you said at age 16, you started doing bookkeeping.
I did.
And was that for businesses, just in general? And how did you lead up to managing people's money at such a young age? Like, how do you get there?
So I was always, what's interesting is, selling candy at 13 meant that I had to be responsible for ordering, reordering, right, keeping track of money. And when really at a very young age, I was always given a responsibility of calculate this. Are the numbers right? Did you tabulate this properly? Are you doing that? And interestingly enough, people would always come to me and say, hey, I need you to check these numbers. I need to check these numbers just to see if they're right. And I got that so much until it just really made sense. It was, I need you to second that. I need you to second that. I need you to check it first and then I'll check it. And then with my mom, having friends who were in business and family in business,
Okay.
and then my mom, it really, it became second nature. So individuals were like, wow, you're creating balance sheets and you're like a teenager. And so, I mean, I did. And I was also interested. I used to say that I was a numbers girl. I'm much more than a numbers girl. But you could ask me, you could give me figures and I literally could calculate them in my head and say, no, you're off by maybe 20%, or you're off by $2, or you're off by this and that. So I think it was something that was natural that I just never really acknowledged as such. But individuals it varies different type of businesses. They were like, yeah, so can you come in here and and do the bookkeeping? We'll send it over to the accountant, but we need to make sure these numbers are correct.
Right.
So, you know, and I wasn't an accountant, but as a bookkeeper, really you're preparing the documentation
Yeah.
to just be reviewed, right?
Yeah.
By the
Absolutely.
accountant. Yeah.
That's
So
so fascinating. Go ahead, Joe.
yeah, I mean, you share a lot.
A
So
lot.
it's a couple things I want to unpack, right? That caught my attention because you're what I refer to as the purebred entrepreneur, right? We hear that a lot. And sometimes people think they're that and they're really not. I know I had to learn entrepreneurship, but it's in your DNA. Like you grew up in it. It was like cultural, like
Yeah.
you were going to be an entrepreneur whether you wanted to or not, right?
Right.
A lot of people work jobs and they do entrepreneurship on the side. You do entrepreneurship and you work jobs on the side, right?
Oh,
And
Nice.
so, yeah. And so one question I have about that is this, because I run into this a lot. You have a lot of individuals who want to tiptoe into entrepreneurship and their fear is the income is not going to be consistent. Their fear is I have this W-2. They have this feeling of safety, right? And we all learn at some point that job security is an oxymoron, right? If you ever learned that lesson, you might as well believe in a tooth fairy, right?
Right.
But I'd be interested to hear your response to that when you come across individuals who are seeking your consultation and assistance and they have that mental hang-up that somehow entrepreneurship cannot be as consistent, cannot be as predictable, that you cannot create as solvent a lifestyle as you would as a W-2. The other thing that caught my attention that you shared was, you know, I started out in corporate America. And growing up, West Side Detroit, Highland Park, 20 years ago, I don't need to go any further. If you're a Detroiter, you know what I'm talking about. You know, I come out of U of M, graduate U of M, take this job in corporate America. And I realized early on that despite all my intellect, despite work ethic, like I was antisocial. Like I didn't understand how to interact, right? So I'm being invited to these dinners and I'm watching, I'm taking notes as best I can in terms of just how to conduct myself. But I was a fish out of water. And so often people like, if you're going to climb the corporate ladder, that's a skill you have to learn. Like, yeah, I see you over there, right? You know, it's not about just eating utensils, like how to greet somebody's wife. Yeah, it's about how to get invited to the event after the event. It's how to conduct yourself in such a way where not even just a golf course, but they invite you to the private bar in their home. And it took me I paid a heavy penalty by not having inculcated those skills or realizing just how important they were, right? You know, for me, I would walk into the space, they're ordering swordfish, and I'd be thinking about burger. And I learned real quick, that's not what you want to be doing in environments. I actually look for your face. But I mean, that was like part of my evolution. So, you know, I'm a Neanderthal at heart, but I know how to turn it on when I need to. But I want to hear your responses to those things, right? Number one, the whole ideal of entrepreneurship being a thing and being predictable. How do you make it predictable? Like, how do you sit in and have faith in your entrepreneurial skills, acumen, experience, and then, you know, go a step further in terms of doing a deep dive in terms of why etiquette is so absolutely important, particularly when we talk about climbing the corporate ladder.
So let me just first address the entrepreneurship piece because, you know, you're absolutely right. Many people come to me for consultation in private. So I've probably consulted with quite a few people that you could even possibly know that you never know that I've consulted. Yep. And their questions are exactly that. Like, how do I make this work? Like, how do you make it look so easy, or you make it seem like, you know, it's doable? And the reality is when you give yourself no other option, right? So the question becomes, are you going to sink or are you going to swim? That's number one. Number two is, how bad do you want it?
Yep.
Right? So with anything, even when you're in corporate America, the question is always, you know, well, it used to be, because it's different today. But it used to be, well, do you really want the promotion? Well, what are you really, what are you willing to do? Are you willing to be trained, or are you willing to do this? Even though we understood that there was nepotism, right? It was always, what are you willing to do? Well, with entrepreneurship, you have to be ready to sacrifice everything, right? There's a post that I make sometime that says, sometimes you have to sacrifice everything for a dream that only you can see, because the vision that you have as an entrepreneur is not everybody else's vision. The dream that you have isn't everybody else's dream. So the question becomes, how serious are you about it? What are you willing to sacrifice? And what are you willing to do to continue to grow? And are you coachable? That's a major piece, because one of the things that I realized about myself was I was always in corporate America. Now, mind you, aside from all of that, I started in corporate as a teenager, working for the gas company. Okay. So a lot, and I had 8 or 9 years with that before I even went on to program management with another company. But let me say this, I was always coachable. I was always teachable. And every free course in corporate that I could possibly take that would enhance my skills and abilities, I took. So whether it was business process improvement, or giving and receiving constructive feedback, coaching one-on-one, like literally, I stayed in brown bag lunch sessions. If I had a free 30 minutes or hour, or even if I didn't have it, I created the space to learn the things that I needed so that I could grow. As an entrepreneur, just like a corporate position, you have to have a personal development plan and a professional development plan, right? So I spent a lot of time in corporate, they have you go through the IDPs. Well, I do that for individuals because oftentimes as an entrepreneur, individuals don't have an individual development plan. That is for personal growth as well as professional growth. And most times entrepreneurs don't put those two pieces together. Okay. So when you have an individual development plan or development plan, and you're looking at your personal situation and your professional, sometimes the things in your personal life need to be adjusted, right? Which means that the etiquette piece, but there's also the professional etiquette piece, right? So in your personal life, you have to say, what are some things I need to do better personally that will enhance my life professionally? Okay. In a professional space, I'm not trying to be anyone else, but what I am trying to do is understand better understand, if not understand, the culture that I'm in, what's required of me, if I'm comfortable with the changes that are required of me, and am I willing to do the personal and professional work that I need to do? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And these are topics as entrepreneurs that aren't often discussed at length. We gloss over those things. But then when I get a call for a coaching session and someone's like, and most often I'm like, I don't really have time, but if you get in with me for me to coach you, your life is changing. Because it's like, so I'm going to deal with both your personal and professional situation without even asking you. Thank God I have insight. But without asking you what's going on personally, I can tell you what's going on personally based on what's happening professionally.
Yeah.
But I also think that that comes from my experience. And there's something that I always tell people. There's theory and there's practice. There are those of us who have lived it. And then there are those of us who have studied it. Right? And for those of us who have lived things, we tend to have an even greater insight. And so when you come, the answers that we give are probably more specific, more actionable items, and they don't just speak to one facet of your life, right? So what I will say in terms of etiquette in the business space is this, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. There were situations in corporate America, that in some situations, I may have had to attend events that I didn't necessarily, they weren't my preference. But because I had been trained as such a little girl, right, going into adulthood in the areas of social graces and etiquette, I was trained to set a table for a king or queen, literally. Like that was a part of what I had to do as a little girl growing up. It's true. So sitting down at a table, I knew what fork to pick for what because I had to set the table. I was trained to do that, right?
Yeah.
The other part was introductions. That was a part of my training. So I could curtsy, right? Like you do in England, or I could go and speak to someone's spouse or significant other and may know what to say based on the culture, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But that again was a part of training as I grew up. The other part is when I was in situations in corporate and I didn't particularly want to attend the event, I attended the portions of the event to ensure that I was recognized as having participated. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But I knew what to attend and what to do. That again comes from being taught, right? So sometimes in events, it's not that I don't want to come to your home for the after party. It's the fact that I really don't do some of the things that you all do. And I may not be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But maybe I do drink Shirley Temples. And I'm laughing, but it's a very real conversation, right? Yep. Maybe that's what I do. So maybe I do come because your kids are there and I really actually want to talk to your kids because I enjoy children, right? So I found spaces and pieces of events that I really enjoyed. And then I timed myself. If the event was 5 hours, I wasn't there 5 hours.
Yeah.
Because number one, I had a family. And when I didn't have a family, it was I had something else to do. Yeah. So it was, if I need to be here, I identified that, right? And if it's 5 hours, maybe I did go for an hour, hour and a half. And it's okay to excuse yourself. And then also there's a way to do that. Yep. Does that make sense? So all of those things are incorporated in finishing school, in charm school, right? As you continue training throughout life. And I think what has happened is individuals don't, okay, so I associate life skills with etiquette and social graces. The average person does not. Mm-hmm. But when they begin to understand that included in etiquette and social graces training is civility, right? First impressions and greetings, right? Appropriate conversations, because there are appropriate and inappropriate conversations, and how to address an inappropriate conversation without insulting anyone, but in a way that says, oh, wow, that's really interesting, and then changing the subject in a very kind and polite way. Many people don't know how to do that. And so what happens is they go into a rabbit hole, right, that they can't get out of because the conversation's been started and now they're uncomfortable, right? So when you look at those skills and combining those and saying, wow, these are skills that I really that really help me to maneuver throughout life, the thought process is different. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. You said something that caught my attention, like when the first 10 minutes of conversing with another entrepreneur, I know what you're reading and what you're not reading. I can hear it. I know if you read John C. Maxwell. I know if you've read Jack Canfield. I know if you're into Les Brown. I know if you're into any particular author or book, right? The lesson I've learned as an entrepreneur is that leaders are readers. And, you know, something I used to do actually as a prospecting tool is I would go to coffee shops and I would take the 2 books that I'm reading, I would put it at the end of the table. And inevitably, entrepreneurs would walk up to the table, sit across from me and want to talk to me about the book. And at that point, I knew I got them. I was like, okay, right. I know that's an entrepreneur that's about personal and professional development. Mm-hmm. And I took on a lot of clients that way, just sitting at the coffee shop with books. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing too when it comes to etiquette and conversation and diction and language and just certain skills that you learn. And you can tell that too. Like you can literally tell the socioeconomic class, oftentimes the individuals, just based on the verbiage and diction that they use. And people use that to discern and recognize whether or not they want to do business with you. People don't realize that. Like, I remember the CEO of a company out, you know, probably against permission, I won't mention his name, but he owns one of the largest African-American businesses in the Midwest. And I remember he invited me to Detroit Athletic Club. And I remember I was scared to death because you know what's on the menu there, right? I'm just starting out as an entrepreneur. I'm like, oh God, please order the soup, you know, and I'm just being real. And man, he ordered that full entree and I'm looking at it. I'm like, this is like a week's worth of income that he just ordered, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sitting in my seat. And look, the fact of the matter is I was there on his time, picking his brain, asking him questions. And I'll tell you, aside from the technical questions he answered for me, aside from the business how-tos and understanding numbers, quantifying leadership, some of the most important lessons I took from him is how he conducted himself, like how he interacted with other business owners at the Detroit Athletic Club, like how he interacted with the wait staff, how people who came into the room, how he greeted them. I paid attention to all of that. I paid attention to the way he dressed. And look, I wasn't trying to emulate him, but I knew if I wanted to get invited into those spaces at some point, I had to pick some of this stuff up. And it's interesting to me that because look, let's face it, right now we're at this period of time where people are into the grunge. They're into, I want to show up in the classroom, show up in the business room in my jeans and shirt. We're at the stage right now where people want to quote unquote be themselves, right? And that's cool if you're an entertainer. That's cool if you're a social media, this, that, and other. That's cool if you're in an industry where that's okay. But there are a lot of industries right now, or there are a lot of rooms that you won't get invited into because you haven't picked up these things, right?
That's very true. And one of the things that I will say to you, what's really interesting is there was a time as I matured and moved along in corporate America, as well as entrepreneurship, there would be things that I wasn't invited to and I would get offended. Yep. And then what I realized was, but all the majorly important meetings I was invited to, right? Yep. It was, I'm like, well, they didn't, and I didn't pay attention to it until people would say, oh, did you get the invite? Well, did you get the invite? But what was interesting is I would say, okay, so you didn't invite me, but your leaders invited me to their event, right? Yep. Or actually the individuals making the decisions, they actually sent a personal invite and sent somebody to pick me up. And I would just, at one point, I would get offended and my mother would say to me, and so why are you offended? And I would say, well, geez, I really helped him do this and I helped him do that. And then I realized that you pick and choose your battles. I'll say it like that.
That's a good one.
And so it was, you didn't need to battle anything because your name was already in the room. Right. I didn't have to. There are certain rooms that you don't need to be in, because if you don't need to be, why? Right. And it took me time, because at first I was like, well, I don't want people to think I'm antisocial, because interestingly enough, Mr. Buford, I have an IT background. So a lot of people don't know that. So I literally was an introvert for many, many years, but because I was thrown into fields or areas where I had to lead teams and to work with other groups, I began to become an ambivert. So it was, I don't want people to think that I'm antisocial, and I don't want people to think that I don't want to show up. And then when the other types of invites of the other information would come through, I was like, oh, so I get it. Like, I got it. But it's really, and let me just say this, sometimes it's okay that you're not invited, because the conversation on the menu isn't one you want to have anyway. You really want to have the conversation on the menus that you'd like to be a part of are the individuals that make the decisions, or have you be a part of the development maybe of making groups or developing groups or making decisions. Your work precedes you. Yep. And that's something that, my mom would always tell me. She said, your work precedes you. And it took a little bit of time, but I remember when I lived out of state for a bit, and I was getting calls. I'm like, I'm trying to take a sabbatical. Like, I had a death or whatever, and I was taking care of some things. And I'm like, I'm really trying to take a sabbatical. And I would receive call after call. We really need you to come and do this project. We really need you to come and do this. And so the point that I'm making is sometimes when you don't think people are paying attention, they really are, number one. And they're calling you because, believe it or not, they actually value your time sometimes more than you do. And what they realize is they'd rather have you at the other table, right, than the other things, because what's most important is what they may have set aside for you to do or invite you in. I'll give you another example. So there is a new social networking app that has just been launched. It was launched a few months ago, and it's called Live Waves. Well, I met with the team in December. Initially, they were asking, we want you to come in as, of course, I'm a shareholder, but as the chief marketing officer. Well, I'm now the chief projects program management officer, right? But there was information that had already been shared, and I get on the line and I'm just like, so I don't know that I have time, but what are you talking about, right? And I laughed because I was like, I have zero capacity. Like, I don't know, I don't know. And they were like, yeah, but you can do this. I'm like, okay, but that means I've got to do A, B, C, and D. But the point that I'm making is when your work precedes you, one, people know that you're busy, because when your work precedes you, other people are trying to get your attention, right? But the other part of that is I am literally, again, a part of history in the making. So I'm okay with not having been a part of some other discussions because now I can take individuals along with me again to be a part of history in the making yet again. And so sometimes those meetings, it's really okay. And it's not being arrogant or anything like that. You just have to start looking at your time. Look at the time you have. Do you really have the time? Pick and choose the events that you want to attend. And I will tell you this, I've met people at, I'm into arts and culture. So we're talking DIA, operas, plays, different things like that. Some of the people that you probably thought that were more important at other places, you end up meeting some people that you're like, oh, wow, that's the perfect person to do A, B, and C. Attending events that some of the other people that you would have attended events with wouldn't even be at. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So, and I don't say that like being discriminatory or anything, but that also comes along with diversifying and diversification, right? And that's another thing that you learn when you're talking about etiquette and social graces. Does that make sense? Because you're learning about, okay, the various different types of etiquette. Wow. Well, what about the various different types of industries? Okay. I remember I have an agreement with Aquinas College. So we launched etiquette and social graces training in 2019, fall of 2019, right before COVID. And I remember being in a class, and this young lady, very highly intelligent. Oh my gosh, she's going to be a neural, whatever it is, but it's amazing. And we were talking about culture, and I showed a video, and it really went through the different cultures and the different greetings, how you greet them, what they mean. And one of the conversations that I had was, so if somebody frowned at you when you did this, that will be why, right? And so she just burst out laughing, and she was like, that makes sense. Now I know why they were looking at me crazy. And I'm saying that to say, the area of cultural communication, right, and cultural diversity are major when you talk about etiquette, social graces, right, conversations, first impressions, and really understanding people. And that's why I say that it's so important, to look at it more as a life skill versus something extra because I simply just need to know how to use a knife and a fork. It's so far beyond that. Mm-hmm. So far beyond.
So I have two questions, right? Because let's be real. This is Detroit Metro. This ain't New York. It's not Los Angeles. It's not Atlanta. Mm-hmm. I love my city, but I know what it is.
That's true.
Right? Okay. And to be transparent, like we're having kind of like a highbrow conversation that's going to go over the heads of most individuals. It is. Most individuals aren't operating in those type of spaces, right? Detroit is still, despite the gentrification and everything else that's taking place, it's still a blue collar, Friday nights, go to the juke joint, sip on something, have a good time space. It still is, okay? And it's all good, right? So when I first met you, the first thing that went through my mind was, okay, etiquette. I know how important it is, but how in the world did Nicole Beecher figure out her target market and then figure out how to package this in such a way where you're in an environment where, I mean, let's be real. I mean, you know your business better than me, but I gotta believe that 70% of the people just aren't even participating in your quote unquote target market, right? You'd have a difficult time sitting down with 70% of the people in your Detroit Metro and saying, hey, this etiquette piece is important. If you want to level up and start getting in certain circles, most people aren't even thinking that. They don't think they're ever going to get there, right? It sounds like. So you start this etiquette, you determine your target market, and what does the process look like in terms of how do I package this in such a way where I can lean in and say, hey, $250, $500, $1,000 an hour, I need that bag for you to teach you this, because you're going to get a bigger ROI than what you're investing in. What did that process look like?
So I will say this. I think one of the reasons that it's been a lot easier for me is because I learned that was a part of my upbringing. So I realized the value, right? So with anything, having a background in sales, right? In marketing, it's really feature, benefit, and value, right? So what are you offering? What are the benefits, and what value does that bring? I'll say it like this. You can either buy a $250 pair of Jordans. They might last 3 months, 4 months. Or you can spend $250 for charm school and enhance your child's life for a lifetime. Which one would you like? Actually, I have something coming out this thing.
I like it.
Right?
Yeah.
And what it's really saying is you're looking at how your children are interacting, or even yourself as an adult, and you realize that they're missing out. I have something that can help put you in the places that you desire to be and be comfortable with that, right? You can choose not to enroll, and that's your choice. But in order for you to move to another level at some point in your life, that's going to be required, right? And so with some of the courses, if you even look online now and you look at what's being offered in the course, it's civility, first impressions, right? Conversation, and things like that. Well, let's just be honest. One of the things that Detroiters are criticized for is not being able to communicate as effectively, right, as others in other cities, counties, communities. That's number one. Another thing is when we talk about the school system. I'm a graduate of the Detroit public school system. However, many of the people that I graduated with were introduced to some level of training, right? But that was a different era. That was a different time. When we talk about what the school system looks like today in some areas, it's good if they can get out of high school, right? We haven't even addressed the fact that you really don't know how to dress properly. Forget an interview, because they may teach that, right? But when you walk into a restaurant that is a 5-star restaurant, or you don't go because you're not comfortable, how do you address that? Aside from the utensils, it's the fact that you're not comfortable. So it's really about becoming the best version of yourself. So what I've done is said, you can choose not to come. You can call me, the word is bougie or whatever you like. But when you start to look at my path, what does that look like? When you start to look at the tables that I've sat at, as well as my twins, what does that look like? when you realize, yes, I'm a Detroit native, technically, right? But look at all of the opportunities that I've had. The other part is I'm very transparent. And I tell people, I attended Mumford High School. I attended Wayne County Community College. And I'm graduates of all Wayne State University. So what people see is, wow, she attended school in Detroit, period, right? And so she's a Detroit native, but what she's saying is there's another level. There's another level with your name on it. There's another door that's available to you. It's available to you. But the question is, what are you going to do to reach the next level? Are you going to get what you need, or are you going to bask in feeling like, well, I think that's for people that are of a certain class or of a certain level? Well, no, actually, when you start looking at rates comparatively, what I offer in charm school, let me be 100% transparent. If you were to go to another state, a mini charm school course for a day, 8 hours with a lunch included, is $750 or better. And what I'm saying is, you either want the Jordan, you either want to pay for a hairstyle for a month. I'm being realistic, right? Or you come over here, bring your children to me, and let me help you, because it really does take a village. And I've got the resources, I've got the faculty, I've got the village that's here and ready. And I can also relate to the fact that, yeah, I attended Detroit public schools as well. So what set me apart, right, from maybe someone else who also attended the school and maybe didn't have the same experiences or training? The other side of that, Mr. Buford, is I've hired thousands of people. So in corporate America, literally, when you talk about the gas company, I'm not naming companies, but the gas company, right? I worked there. I was called baby rep. So people saw me as a kid, literally, right? And then from being a kid to getting married and children, I mean, they watched that over an 8.5-year period. Then I went to another company where, I literally was a program manager, the youngest, and I had it ended up being a 600-seat call center, which I gave reviews and approved raises. You hear me, right? So then I went from that to a Sprint store. Well, I don't even think it was a Sprint. Was it a Sprint store? But whatever the case, I worked for Sprint. So what I'm really saying is, I've got people know who I am, whether they acknowledge me or not. However they choose to do that, they know who I am. Where they have either worked for me, they've either crossed my path in some way. Some of which maybe it's like they'll come up to me and say, "I remember you from this company or that company. And wow, you opened a school, and that just makes sense because we need that really bad." But then they go back and say, "But you tried to implement something similar in the workplace, right? For professional development training." So it's kind of like the light bulb goes off. What is interesting is this. So our ribbon cutting was in 2019, right? That was in Bloomfield Hills. We opened the Southfield location March 2020, one day literally before the mandated shutdown.
Yeah,
Okay, one day. Like, we had the ribbon cutting, and literally like the next day it was like, close your doors. And it was a little discouraging because we had served over 1,500 students. That's, first of all, not common, because normally when you start a school, right, especially the type of school, the private school that I've started, you might get a couple of hundred students. Some of the students that we serve were through organizations, and so I donated that time, right? But the reality was, we served those students, whether they were in a workforce program, whether they were in a summer program, whether, it was for whatever the reason. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that because even in the midst of the pandemic, right, and having to close, we remained open. We offered services virtually. And so what happens? People begin to realize just how important communication was, because now their children were home with them. Parents begin to realize, right, what they didn't know. And they'll come and say, I can't give them what they need. Now I know because they were home with me, right? But the flip side is now that things have settled, people are calling like, you said you were going to open, you opened it and you stayed open. You stayed at it. Your doors are still open. And I at first I wasn't sure if I needed this, but I know I need it now. Well, why am I saying all that? Well, when you talk about how I packaged it, right? I remained who I was, Mr. Buford. The area I live in is still the area I live in. I didn't change who I was. But what I said was, I have some options for you. I have some opportunities for you. What I'm charging you with is the opportunity to help you grow as I continue to grow. And if you will, and if you so desire, there's another way to achieve some of the things, to be in the rooms, but most importantly, being comfortable in your skin while you're in the rooms and in the spaces or in the boardrooms or amongst people that you've never been around. So that for me is really what the message has been.
That definitely speaks to it. And like for you being able to keep your doors open and shift how you know, offered these services, that's a testimony in itself to how important it is what you do, right? Because you're using what you teach to keep your doors open and everything as well. So it all comes full circle. So absolutely, I would believe that people certainly should and would be paying even closer attention to that. We're getting close towards the end of our hour, but we do have a few questions we always ask our guests here at the end. So I want to make sure we get to them. So first things first, if you can narrow it down, what would be your superpower?
I would say my superpower really is the ability to help shift the trajectory of someone's life north. I really have proven to be able to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And you shared so many important lessons, and I could think of like a million other questions even to ask you after this, so we'll have to have you back. But if there's one very important lesson that you want to make sure that you hit home and that anyone who's listening and watching from an entrepreneurial standpoint takes away, what would that be?
Learn to love yourself and appreciate the space that you're in so that you can grow or continue to grow, should I say, to become the best version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us here today. What is the best way that people can either get in touch with you, learn more about you, learn more about the Etiquette School, all the good stuff?
So we are on Facebook. You can reach us on Facebook at Beecher Etiquette School of Michigan. You can reach us on Instagram at Beecher Etiquette School. You can reach us online at beecheretiquetteschool-mi.com. You can also call us at 248-671-3022. You can also text us, actually. So if you text us, we respond. So that's super cool. Or you can reach us on site at 26211 Central Park Boulevard, Suite 116 in Southfield, Michigan.
Perfect. We will make sure to include those links and the numbers so you can text it here in our show notes below. Thank you again so much. We're going to continue this conversation with our group inside the NextOppSocial After Show group on Facebook. And anyone who's watching, we invite you to join us there. The link's in our description. Or you can head to Facebook, go to NextOppSocial, click community, and we'll be happy to have you inside. Don't forget, make sure hit that subscribe button here on YouTube or visit our website at nextoppsocial.com. And if you love today's episode with Nicole, we encourage you to share it with someone else who can gain value from this as well. So thank you again, Nicole. We have to have you back because there's a lot more I know we could dive into, but we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it. It was great meeting you.
Shukran.